Hello and welcome to Backyard Catch. This is Nick Roby. Thanks so much for joining me once again. We are recording on Monday, Labor Day, September 5th, 2023. Forgot the date for a second. Super pumped to be here. What a fun full college weekend. And as I'm recording this, we still have one more game. And if you're listening on podcasts, I'm decked out in my school's colors. I got my Clemson gear on, so gotta support the team, you know. So they have not played yet. So if you're listening to this, there's a good chance they will have already played, and we'll have some more information on how the Tigers are doing as they had to go on the road at Duke. That will be in prime time on Labor Day night. So we'll get to that in the next episode as we'll have more information on them. But other than that, every other team in the country has played at least one game, and some teams have played even 2 games. Man, it's the beauty of college football is that we can do all this prep work, all this thinking, all this just trying to understand, break down teams or feeling a good feeling and on a certain team. And a lot of times we have, a good hunch on where teams are, and then other times you just don't know until the ball snapped. And there are teams that have really proved it, some in a good way and then some in a surprising way that we maybe didn't play as well as we thought we would have. And there's just so much we could talk about and so much you could fit in. It's just hard to even fit into one show. And so we're going to do our best to really try to just hit on some big things and really just get some big takeaways from the games this weekend. And that also will include up to, Florida and Utah as well. Just because, these first Labor Day weekend games, it's a wide span of when your team can play, and it's interesting to see as we go from there. So starting with Florida and Utah, I was surprised at this one, and also just in trying to do this again and trying to pick spreads, it's tough. I think in week ones a lot of times you have at least a sense of where teams are. I feel like this year was just super tough. It was super tough to try to figure out where these teams are at. You got a Florida team that may be around 500, but could have an opportunity out west and get a win on the road at Utah. You've got Mertz, the new quarterback, and we're hearing some things they wouldn't utilize all the right ways, or that he could be utilized more. And you got a Utah team who's back-to-back or has won the Pac-12 2 times in a row. They get Cam Rising back, but then he's out for the game, So they don't really lose at home, but he's been their quarterback for the past few years. So, you just don't know what you're going to get, what's going to win out. And it was going to be close. So I ended up taking Florida plus the 6.5, I think just because it was close. It was close last year. And I was just really surprised. Obviously I didn't cover, but I was just really surprised at the offensive line from Florida. I know they had gotten some new transfers, and I just really thought they'd be able to run the ball better with Trevor Etienne and those guys, and they just weren't. I mean, it was just props to that Utah team. They were really solid up front, and they just played really team quality football. And, their quarterbacks played well and gave them really good shots, but I think this defense, I just underrated how good this defense was going to be this year. And I think a lot of times, too, in these week 1 matchups, it's not that it's going to be this is their whole season, but you learn a lot. You learn a lot of a team, of a style, and what is this feeling going to be? And in a primetime matchup, and it's like all eyeballs are on you, they really showed up. And Utah just seems like a fun place to play. It just seems like a fun environment. So props to you guys out there. That was just looked like a cool environment. I was just disappointed in how Florida showed, because there were opportunities, like they had a couple drives early, they missed a field goal, they have drops, they have penalties, they just kept getting penalties. They just kept shooting themselves in the foot, and then, Utah would take advantage, as like good teams do. And so really it was a combination of both. Utah played, I thought, a good game, especially without Cam Rising, who is like, that's a big deal, and you almost kind of forget he didn't play because that's how much of a team they were. But then, Florida, I just think goes back to the drawing board, and now they're just really trying to see what they've got going forward. And thankfully, you can come back home and kind of see what you got, coming in the next few weeks. But they got to figure it out because they play in the SEC, and they got teams like they're going to play, Florida State, and they got to play Georgia, Tennessee, Kentucky, South Carolina. Like they're going to have, these games they have to play, and it's just, will they make a bowl game? I don't know. It's going to be very telling next few weeks in Gainesville. But Utah looks like another strong season out ahead, and I think that was another thing as we transition, is that the Pac-12, it's kind of like actually kind of sad in a way, because obviously this is the last year of the Pac-12 as we know it. I mean, let alone if there's even going to be a league left. I mean, there's only 2 teams who are still affiliated with them, and they are one of the best conferences in the country. They have all these top teams who have a viable shot of winning the conference, and if they come out with no losses or even one, they can be in the playoff. It's very feasible. You've got Southern Cal, you've got Oregon, you've got Washington, you've got Utah, UCLA. They look like they got some pieces. I don't know if they're going to win, but they look like a tough out. You've got Oregon State with DJ Uyunglele. Like they looked good on the road, and they play tough, and it's a much deeper league, I think, than people are going to give it credit for. And oh yeah, and by the way, they got Colorado, at least for this year. So we're going to talk about that. Don't you worry. So let alone Colorado, who is just a fascinating story. I don't think they're going to, it's hard to know after week 1, but I don't know if I would say that they're still ready to win the conference, but they're going to be a tough route, as they've showed. So Pac-12, that was just fun. That was the big takeaways. The Pac-12 is really tough. And I think that, and also I think it's just clear that I don't know if there's a clear, number 1 team. I think teams can make cases, and, it'll be interesting to see how the voters play it out, with what Florida State did last night. But, there's no clear, I would say a unanimous, this is the clear favorite, a clear top 2. There are top teams, and that's what's this year's gonna be so fun because of that. It's just, there's just so many ways it could go, and even with this past week, you just don't quite know until the ball snapped. And so we learned a lot, but there's a lot more to go. I think there were two very statement games this weekend, and one we've circled for a while. We kind of knew, and another one, there were some interesting storylines, but not very many people in the country, including myself, thought it was going to be a close game. So we'll start with Colorado at TCU, big noon kickoff. Deion Sanders, Coach Prime, goes into Fort Worth to play Texas Christian, who just came off of playing in the national championship game. They lose, coordinator and have a lot of new pieces, but still a tough program, and people ranked them number 17 in the country. It's still a little high because of all the turnovers, like a turnover of personnel and then some new system to install. But I mean, it's still a tough out, and it's tough to play on the road. And then talking with what, Deion Sanders, Coach Prime, as he likes to be called, and this Colorado team, they brought in so many transfers. It was I think only one scholarship player was still left over? I don't remember the exact numbers off the top of my head, but it was just a crazy amount of just new personnel and guys who didn't play. I mean, it's just, you didn't know. You don't know what you just don't know what you're going to look like, and that's what made picking that game so tough, spread-wise, is because you just don't know with Colorado what you were going to get. And 20.5 just seems like a lot of points, and I think they would, be admirable, but it was just hard to see them covering, and boy, did they cover. I mean, that was such a captivating game, and that's why you love Saturdays in the fall, and that's why, you love seeing all this, because it's a game that was, not only did Colorado cover, it was just so entertaining. It was just back and forth, kept you on the edge of your seat the whole time, to where, if you have kids and they're napping, you're trying to be quiet, because it's just so entertaining, and you're seeing big play after big play, and just dynamics of this game. You could just talk about, we could take up this whole rest of this episode talking about this game, because that's how good it was. So Colorado comes in there and they win 45-42. Shadar Sanders, I mean, a big name in this is Travis Hunter, but Shadar Sanders, what he did, I mean, being the coach's son and being the big name that your dad is, being the spotlight that's on you because you're the coach's son and being quarterback and coming with him from Jackson State. I thought he was a good player, but I wasn't expecting that, He threw 510 yards. It was a school record. It was his first start on the road. It was incredible. Colorado had 4 players with over 100 yards receiving. 4. That's insane. Like, the numbers were so big and so all over the place, it's just hard to even process them. And then Travis Hunter, what he was doing, the dude played 160 something snaps. He played 2 ways, and not just played it, but played it well, was the guy. Over 100-yard receiving, touchdown, and interception, locking down top players. I mean, he looked like, as when you get with these recruiting rankings, and guys can be good, but not every 5-star is the same, and not every top player is the same as you rank these guys. And that's why they try to have these little grading scales, but it's hard to know. You want to see what it looks like when the lights get shown on them. And he was recruited to Florida State. He was #1 player in the country. Follows Deion Sanders, and seems to really relate to him, which is really cool. He goes to Jackson State. He balls out there. He goes to Colorado, starts, and doesn't just start, but takes over, and was just making all these crazy catches. And I mean, Colorado put the college football world on notice. It was impressive. And they got Dylan Edwards. He was explosive out of the backfield. I'm even just pulling up the box score over here. Sanders, 510 yards, 4 interceptions. Dylan Edwards had 4 touchdowns, 5 for 135 yards, 3 touchdowns. Wilkerson rushed the ball well. I mean, it was impressive. And then his other son, Shiloh Sanders, was another quarterback. This is the type of team that they showed was you would expect maybe for a few years from now. You don't expect that game 1, and telling you, Coach Prime and this team, they put they quieted a lot of doubters. And now they're going to host Nebraska, and they're a 9-point underdog. I don't want to play that team. Who wants to play that team right now with all the confidence they have? And I'm just saying, that's another tough out. And they're just going to be such a fun storyline because they're like that, when you're binge watching a show and they leave you on a cliffhanger at the end of the episode. You just want to know what's next. What's the next thing? And what are the next thing they're going to do? What's the next thing Coach Prime's going to say on the sidelines? What's the next? It's just super impressive. And also, just another side note, I'm glad he clarified this. I don't know if you watched the game, you saw a little D or a little L. And I was trying to figure out what it was on the jersey. So instead of doing captains, they're doing, he calls them leaders, and then he calls them dogs. So he doesn't like doing the captain thing. So, I mean, listen, it's working for him. Kids are buying in. He is, was a dynamic player both ways at Florida State and in the NFL, and he played baseball too. So, not everyone may like him, but you have to respect him, I think, for what he's doing and with the programs he puts together, and he wins. And the guy wants to help kids improve and give them their best chance for the next level. So I think people didn't like the way that he was coming across of all these transfers and just coming in as himself. But I've heard somebody else say this too. What's conventional about college football right now? Josh Pate was saying this on his show, I forget on his show or on Twitter. What's conventional about college football right now? We've got 2 California teams coming to play in the Atlantic Coast Conference. What is this? We got the Big 12 or Big 10 spanning across the country. We've got all these mega conferences, all this NIL money, with hardly any regulation. What's conventional about this? There's a fun story to watch, and it'll be interesting to see how this narrative, this storyline continues to grow too. So, and then just hitting on TCU, to me, I wasn't even like, I don't know if I was 100% even disappointed in TCU. I thought they played a good game. I mean, there were some times where they had some breakdowns in coverage, but that's really hard to defend against when you don't know exactly what's coming. I thought Chandler Morris played pretty well. They had some good, they kept responding. They took leads. They just ran out of time. And it was just one of those good games. And they had the magic from last year. And I think that's I think really it's just, you have the history of the year before, but it doesn't always carry over the way we always think it will. And that's okay. It's just each year is a year of its own, and you have the history from before, and you're projecting out, and some of that can carry over into summer, maybe into the new team. But as coaches will tell you, it's a new team, it's new leaders, it's new people. Even if it's the same personnel, they could be in new positions, ask new responsibilities, or trying to carry with the young guys and helping keep the culture going. And so there's a lot of change in the TCU program, and I thought they played pretty well. But there were some things they'll want to clean up and stuff. And I wasn't expecting them to continue the run of last year, because that was just a magical thing of its own. But still, at the same time, I mean, it's tough. You don't want to lose game one at home. But to me, this was more about how impressive Colorado was than more if TCU was disappointing for me. Fans will probably say different, but that's just from an outsider looking in. That's just how I took it. So, and what's interesting as we continue to move on, there's a lot of things to talk about, and there are bigger games, of course. We're gonna get to Florida State, LSU. One I was just impressed with, and just wasn't. I expected Oklahoma to win, but to win 73-0, that was impressive. You know, I mean, they got blanked against Texas last year, and people were, you know, is Venables really the guy? And trying to figure that out. And I don't know if Arkansas State's not going to be that great. So I know you take it with a grain of salt, but I don't care who you are. It's hard to post a shutout. It's hard. I mean, scoring that many points is a lot. Like, you know, even when you start putting your backups and stuff in. So it was just, when I watched them, it was the explosiveness that you have come to know with Oklahoma, especially with the Lincoln Riley days before. And I was impressed with what Dylan Gabriel and that offense were able to do. And defensively, it's impressive to score a shutout. I mean, they just kept scoring and scoring and scoring. It was just, they played really well, and it'll be fun. It'll be very interesting to see what that Oklahoma team looks like going forward. Shout out to Iowa. They scored 24 points. They won 24-14 over Utah State. Cade McNamara led. This was a crazy stat that I saw, and you haven't seen this. It was the first time Iowa started, I think, with a passing touchdown on their first drive since 1991. That's 31 years ago. That's insane. Like, Iowa's always been known for their defense, but if they have any kind of a semblance of consistency in the offense, especially consistency in the passing game, where you have to, you know, respect both sides of the ball, it just makes it interesting. Got to watch out. You know, they'll make some noise in the West and trying to face Wisconsin. You know, the other big scores. Mississippi scored 73 points. Oregon scored 81. It's just crazy. You saw the duck was just passed out from those push. I think it was 536 push-ups you had to do. You know, because you do for every score, and then you add the score as you go. So you saw those, but those were teams playing, you know, lesser opponents than them, and really they're trying to see what they've got. I thought Southern Cal did a good job. I wasn't sure if they were going to cover. I mean, Nevada is not great, but it's just hard to cover that many points. And with what happened against San Jose State, you weren't sure what was going to show up. And man, Caleb Williams is good. He's good. I mean, they had a couple times where he can throw dimes, and I was just impressed from them. And we'll see as the level of competition continues to grow with them, how will this defense look? I think to me and a lot of people, that's always the question. Is I know Lincoln Riley's gonna be solid on offense. I know he is. It's a matter of what is this defense gonna look like, and can they make plays and show up when it really matters, and when you have tougher competition. It was interesting. Other games I was watching or just keeping an eye on was Texas, and they're playing Rice, but wanting to see, are they explosive or just what the field was. I thought they looked, like they were starting to get their hands together, especially like get themselves together, especially in the second half. And just another reminder too is, if you're an average college football fan, you know this, but even just as a reminder for all of us is that these teams don't play preseason games, obviously like the NFL. So like these games, everyone's doing it. Everyone's doing it live together. Like we're all figuring this out. So you don't have those opportunities. And so that's why some coaches like to schedule some of these opponents where, they come in and take a check or they're getting exposure. And then your team, you get to kind of figure out what you're doing because you don't get that exposure. You don't get that. It's just very hard to simulate real live football. You can simulate it as much as you can in practice, and now it's limited more because of the health and safety protocols, which I get it and I support it. It's a tough sport, and I think you want to be careful of athletes as much as possible and limit how many hits they're taking. But it's just hard to simulate that. So that's why some of these teams, that's why you see like a Michigan playing ECU and all this other stuff. So some of those teams I thought there wasn't a super lot surprising for the most part of those teams. A surprising one was Texas State winning at Baylor. I wasn't sure exactly how strong Baylor was going to be, but I thought that one was, that was interesting. State of Texas, had, Texas Tech lost on the road at Wyoming. TCU lost at home. So, you're seeing that stat being thrown around. I think people always want to find those types of things. It's interesting, but, Wyoming's a tough place to play. TCU, you'd expect all those teams to win, but you also never know with week 1 or week 0. You just once until it gets played. I saw, going back to the Pac-12, I saw this stat being thrown around. It was the first time the Pac-12 being undefeated. Like no team is, like they haven't done that before. Like they were 13 and it's a good stat, but at the same time, you need the context of like, say for the ACC, like there are multiple teams playing each other. Like Georgia Tech and Louisville played. Louisville gets the win, in Atlanta at Mercedes-Benz. And Duke and Clemson are about to play. So there's going to be 2 teams with 2 losses anyway. So I get it. And most teams are playing out of conference. But like if you're playing in conference, I think you have to add that in a little bit. Or when you're looking at that stats, I think if you're using that stat, then you also have to use the stat of like, okay, well then, like for the ACC or any conference, I'm using that as an example. If you take that, the teams that are playing inter-conference teams out, what's the record outside of that, So, like the ACC had a couple of good games on national television with the SEC, and they came out on top of that. So, it's gonna be very, very fun. Let's see, other ones I wanted to hit. Alabama took care of business against Middle Tennessee. Penn State was a little closer with West Virginia, and then they pulled away, and so that was good. Good for them to see. I think with Penn State, to me, like they're a good team, and just from an outsider's perspective, they're a good team. But I'm ready to see like, is the hype gonna match on the field, And I can see them beating all these other teams. To me, it comes down to what they do against Michigan, what they do against Ohio State. I mean, if any team I would bet is ready to get out of this division play, it's Penn State, because they deserve opportunities in some years based on record. I mean, like to play in the conference championship game, but based on where they happen to play, Division I just makes it tough. So it's good to see them and what they were doing. They look more explosive in the passing game, which is going to be really big for them. So what they do going forward. Another one in the afternoon slate, that was really interesting was Ohio State and Indiana. And it wasn't a matter of to me, it wasn't a matter of if Ohio State was going to win. Minus some big injury or minus some catastrophic thing happening. To me, Ohio State was going to win. They've won now 29 times in a row against Indiana. To me, it was just you're installing a new quarterback. You're installing what is it going to look like with a new quarterback? And to me, I think you expect some of the you expect with new starters and new, especially on the road, that's tough with a new starter on the road. Clemson's going to try to do that, obviously. So that's always tough. But I think I was just a little bit underwhelmed with some of the ways that they were scoring, and it didn't seem like they had the full throttle that Ohio State offenses have. We've seen the past few years, and it's not that they can't get there. It's just, what would that look like? And I know Ohio State fans are. I bet you're really wanting to see this going. And I have a friend who's a big Ohio State fan, and you want to see more. But I would also say it is week 1 on the road, and so Ryan Day has been known to have these strong offenses. So to me, I would still give it time. But of course, like with any of those bigger brand teams, like Ohio State and Michigan, Clemson, Alabama, Southern Cal, Texas, like, you're not just looking at that current game. You are watching your team saying, Oklahoma, are we ready to play Texas, Oklahoma, Auburn? Can this team, Georgia, play in the playoff? Like, you as a fan, you're projecting out into the future. Whereas coaches see that, but they're also like, okay, we're also just trying to play the game in front of us and then take care of business, improve what we can improve, work on stuff in practice, and continue to make progress going forward. So it's not as, sometimes the offenses don't come out gunslinging. Sometimes the defense really wins early, and sometimes it takes time for offenses. So I would say for Ohio State fans, I would say give it time. But at the same time, like, you are used to, some higher powered offense. And when you have the best wide receiver in the country, and Marvin Harrison Jr., and the weapons that you have, and the expectations that you have, and you're trying to beat Michigan. You don't want to lose to a third time to them. So it'll just be interesting to see. They're just something to watch. It's just something to watch going forward, especially for a team that a lot of people had picked in this cluster of top teams as a team that could win the national title. So that's where I'm at with them. Michigan took care of business, and it was good to see in the passing game. The interesting thing for me was I wasn't necessarily expecting. It was good to see support for their coach. It was interesting how it was being framed as in, like, he was suspended out of his, it was being done against him. They did the whole everyone helped before, and they did a special, formation to start the game. I thought that was a little bit much personally, but, you're supporting your coach, supporting your team. To me, there's a lot of things against the NCAA, but when you lie to them, or that's what's being alleged, is that he wasn't forthright with them, and so they've been going back and forth and, like, should he be suspended, should he not, and then how many games, and then they thought it was approved, and it's not approved, and so it's going to take into next year, and then they do a self-imposed, and it's kind of just it feels like all over the place. So I just thought that was interesting. To me, it felt like a little much, but again, like, you want your players and you want your team to support your coach, and so I get it, but it was just interesting. Just from an outsider's perspective, it was interesting to see that and take that in. So other big games, Georgia took care of business, as we expected. As some of these teams really, they were going to see that. I thought Washington and Boise State was interesting because Michael Penix is in the conversation for the Heisman, and they were a little sluggish at first, and sometimes it takes time to get those deep balls just right and get the feel for the game just right. And Boise State's a tough out. Like, they're not like always the easiest team to play, and they have been a darling of just the underdog, and especially years past. But they're a tough out, and Penix, struggled a little bit, and then you look at his box score now, it's 450 yards for 5 touchdowns. It's just, they're explosive, and to me, it's just, can this defense continue to hold? For them, like, they have a good defense, but it's just, can this offense stay healthy, and especially, can they hold up until they get to these big games and give themselves a chance in conference play, and then even a potential for future success down the road. So they had a lot of injuries last year, and so wanting to see them stay healthy so they can continue to improve this offense. But it was just that was impressive. It was impressive to watch, and so Michael Penix is definitely somebody to keep your eye on. We have some strong names out west. You know, you got Bo Nix at Oregon, you got Penix at Washington, you've got Caleb Williams. I was playing for a second. Caleb Williams at Southern Cal, and so they're fun. There's fun names out there. So unfortunately for us East Coasters, it's a late at 10:30 start kickoff time is late, but it's a lot of good football being played out there, and don't sleep on it just because the conference is not going to be there in the same way we've known it like last year. UCLA, they played a tough Coastal team. I think even Coastal is just interesting. I feel like Coastal and App State are similar in this way, where they've had some, it was just interesting. You have a turnover in the coaching staff, what's going to look like. They were tough again, and that's a tough to go across the country like that. And I thought they played a tough game, and UCLA came on top, and that seemed like that was the way that the game was played. That was the right way for that to go. But it was just interesting to see as UCLA is trying to figure out the new quarterback and just a lot of new things. And so there's some interesting storylines like that. So that one was a fun one to watch. The couple of the big ones I want to hit as we continue to go through this are game day was at North Carolina, in Charlotte for North Carolina, South Carolina. And that one was such a big game because both these fan bases, and living in this kind of area of the country, both these fan bases are continuing to see success, but then wanting to continue to, obviously you want to continue to expand and continue to grow forward from what you did years prior, and wanting to capitalize on what you've got. If you're South Carolina, Coach Beamer has exceeded expectations in the previous couple of years, but you want to continue to grow in that with a really tough schedule, and where you're at in the country with the Southeastern Conference and rival Clemson, and Georgia's just won back-to-back national titles. And then you got Spencer Rattler, supposed to be improved, and just want to continue to see growth in that. And then with North Carolina, you got with Matt Brown's doing. You've been in the ACC title game last year, but you want a better showing, and you want to finish the year strong. You got Drake Mays in the Heisman conversation, but he's probably leaving after this year, and you want to capitalize on that. So it was just definitely a game where for them to reach the goals of like wins and just having it be a successful year. Saturday night was important, and that's what made it intriguing for both. And you just have the battle of the state line, and then who's the real Carolina, and those things make for good TV. But I also would say it just depends on what part of the state or what part of the country you live in. But to me, I think I had some big question marks. With North Carolina, it was okay. Drake May is great, and he's a really good player. Who else is going to step up? He can't be the leading rusher. He has to have good guys to throw to. That secondary has to be improved. I don't care how good your quarterback is if you can't get stops. You're only gonna win so many games by scoring 50 points. 40 points. You gotta get some stops. And then those guys transferred. And I was impressed with North Carolina. I thought they were better than I expected coming into that game, and they were well prepared. They're missing their top two potential receivers. You had the Tez Walker story, which that's just that one's just sad because the dude should have played, but that one was tough, and they were out with him, of course. And if you want to read more into that, you can. But he didn't play. I personally thought he should have been able to play, but the process didn't finish. And they're missing him, and then the transfer from Georgia Tech, and yet they still, to me, that game showed why Drake May is one of the best quarterbacks in the country, one of the best players in the country, because he was getting guys into space. And also you had Chip Lindsey was the new offensive coordinator, because you had Phil Longo going off to Wisconsin. So you're like, okay, what is this going to look like? it's going to be a little more balanced than just the passing, but you just it's hard to feel that out, and who's the running back going to be. And Brooks, man, he was impressive. Like, he was just, that's tough. And then you got, after a guy who was injured all last year and hadn't played since the 2021 game against South Carolina. So that was cool to see him go over 100 yards. And Drake May played really well. I thought the defense was really strong for North Carolina, and they made it really tough on the Gamecocks all night. And so they just look like a tough out. And to me, in the ACC, it's clearly Clemson and Florida State are the 1 and 2, depending on your preference or who you hire on. But North Carolina feels like that. They're solidifying themselves in that number 3 spot to me, with opportunities to continue to grow and to continue to get better, especially with those wide receivers back. To me, they started off strong last year, and like I was saying earlier, they need to finish strong at the end of the season to give themselves a chance. Especially when you play a team like Clemson and you in those bigger games. I think with me with South Carolina, I was like, there were some good takeaways, I thought, from the game, and parts that they played really well and I was impressed with. And then there were other parts I was a little underwhelmed with. And I thought that the system looked, and also the question with South Carolina was, okay, you lose pieces, you lose your tight end, you lose your top running back, you're losing some offensive weapons. What's this defense going to look like? And they also have a new offensive coordinator, Marcus Satterfield out, Loggins in from the NFL, and and I think he was at Arkansas last year as a tight ends coach, and he had a relationship with Coach Beamer. And what's that going to look like? And is it really going to be the offense from like the first 10 games or so, or is it going to be the last 2 where they were just exploded against Tennessee and then beat Clemson on the road? I thought there were still some more improvements to be made, but I was impressed with Rattler. I thought he looked pretty poised in there, all things considered, and really gave his team an opportunity to win. And Juice Wells wasn't as strong. Like, he had some injuries. Leggett looked like he was a different player on the outside, so you're to be encouraged with that. The big thing for me with South Carolina is that offensive line it just needs to get better, especially for our first game. And North Carolina wasn't known as being a team that got off the passer really well. And to me, that is number one, circle on your paper what to focus on going forward, and they've tried to make changes and transfers, but that has to get better. It's like, that's the thing with football, is that it's such a unit that if one guy doesn't cover his guy well, then the play can be blown up dead. Like, Spencer Rattler should not be sacked 9 times. And it wasn't like a case of because he was holding on to the ball too well. He was running around for his life all game long, giving his team opportunity. I mean, he threw for 350 yards and, didn't throw an interception, gave his team opportunities to win. They came back, they had a lead, and then they just ran out of steam. And I mean, props to North Carolina. They recognized it and they kept bringing pressure, and they kept bringing pressure, and they kept, making it tough on them, and they just couldn't run the ball. Because of that, they could not run the ball. So the fact that they were as close as they were in the game, I mean, to me, that is props to. They were really trying to scheme it and really trying, they were throwing a lot of those screens on the outside and trying to give their teams opportunity. But they just shot themselves in the foot with that. The onside kick call was really cool. I thought that was really good. Props to them on that. But then you have to capitalize on that. And I think that's where South Carolina's going to want to go back to the drawing board. And they just play a really tough schedule. And that's what makes it they got Georgia in a few weeks, and they got Tennessee, and they play A&M, and they got Clemson every year. I could see this being a team that continues to get improved, and even just in the offseason, it's just they might not have the same record as last year potentially, but it could even be theoretically a better team, or more complementary pieces of each other. But the offensive line has to get improved, because you're just not going to do a whole lot against other tough pass rushes, in the SEC. And then also they're just they had some injuries, and then they had freshmen that were thrown in there. But I thought they handled themselves pretty well, all things considered. So just a lot I want to continue to improve on. And then the big one, of course, as we'll end this, is LSU Florida State. This one was circled because, they had that 1-point game in New Orleans last year where LSU drives down. They are about to tie the game, and then they miss the extra point, and Florida State comes out of there with the win. But then LSU goes on to win the SEC West, and they play Georgia, and they end up losing, but they play much better in year one under Brian Kelly than I think was even expected necessarily. But I mean, Duke can coach, and like they were a better team than we thought coming into last year. And then Florida State, they ended up winning 9 games, but then with like Coach Novell, like the storyline is, what are they going to look like? Was last year really like, was that for real, or is that a team beating up on weaker opponents and helping your wins, to be better than you actually were? And they're both top 10 teams. And what's early is that you can have a top 10 matchup, but then it's like, what is it? Are both teams really deserving of that ranking, or is one, maybe there's a little bit of fraudness in there, and they should be lower ranked than that? And I was expecting a closer game, and I ended up picking Florida State to cover, but I didn't necessarily felt great about it, to be honest. Like, you just don't know all the way. And Florida State's another team that brought in a lot of transfers, and I think with transfers, you just want to see how they flow together. Are they really, culturally fitting really well, and are they really like a team unit? But I just felt like the key for me, and what showed up in the game is that LSU, I think, is still a good team, but they also had transfers, but they had transfers all over the secondary. And the one of the strengths of Florida State was their deep passing game, and then you bring on like Keon Coleman, and then you have Johnny Wilson, and like those are two tough guys to cover. And like Deuce Chestnut, the transfer from Boston College, I think he's a good player, and he'll end up, I think, having a good year. That's just a tough matchup. And with the secondary, there has to be a lot of communication, obviously. And I was concerned about that for LSU. I mean, it's not that they weren't play well, but that in some moments where you got some broken coverage, especially in week 1, like there's gonna be some open plays, and I think Florida State could capitalize on that. And I think I just felt, but we're talking like what felt like going into the game, like just small differences that you think might win a game, And if someone picked LSU, I wouldn't blame them. And then even in the midst of the game, LSU goes up 17-14 at the half, like, and you're like, they steal 3 points, and you're like, man, that feels like a key 3 points, because it just feels like a close game. And then so you have that as I'm trying to pull up the score. So, man, like, and then Florida State comes out of that half, man, and they were balling. I mean, they really took over the second half. Jordan Travis was just really impressive. His legs, that's tough. And you can tell Florida State's been talking a lot, off season, and they have some talented dudes, but you just wanted to see that come together. And so they backed it up, and they look like one of the best teams in the country. Jordan Travis played a great game. They come in, they score, and then they get the key interception and come back and then score again. And then the next thing you know, they've scored 24 unanswered points and really put this game away. And then LSU scores in garbage time. But it was impressive. I mean, Travis had 342 yards, 4 touchdowns through the air, 1 on the ground. Keon Coleman had 3 touchdowns. I mean, he was really good. Johnny Wilson had 104 yards. Jaheim Bell looked impressive. But Keon Coleman, to me, was another one. The Michigan State transfer, I mean, his catch radius, I'd heard a little bit, but just to see it, I was just impressed from that, man. And they're tough. I mean, it'll be very interesting to see. This is before the AP poll comes out. It'll be interesting to see how voters treat it. Do they reward a team like Florida State? Will they jump them even all the way to 1 because they played who you they themselves voted LSU the number 5 team in the country, or do you keep LSU number 1? But they played a team like UT Martin, and there was disrespect to them, but they should have won. They technically didn't even cover. It was a 50-point spread. So to me, I wouldn't argue with people a whole lot, really, to make Florida State number 1, even though it doesn't feel all the way right because of where you put them. But then that's where these preseason rankings are. I think you put out these rankings, and then you have to be very ready to make big changes based on what we see, because you actually have stuff on. I think that a lot on the field takes precedent to stuff before, and even with carryover with Georgia, I think they still have questions, and until they actually play somebody that's like up to their standard, like it's very interesting. So I wouldn't argue a lot with people if they want to put Florida State 1, but that'll just be interesting to see, as we go into this. So. And then we'll talk some Clemson Duke once that comes back, after that game comes, and we'll preview into the next week's games, in the next episode, and share some where I have teams ranked and stuff. So a lot of fun stuff on the pod. Thank you for listening. If you're listening or watching on YouTube, thank you. Go and subscribe to the YouTube channel. It's Backyard Catch as well. I'll put it in the show notes, and I'll put it in, online, wherever you can find it. That really helps me and helps support the show, and hoping to be able to put some more stuff and content out there as best I can. And so thank you for that, and trying to make this maybe a little more regular kind of a thing. And I'll give you more information as this comes. But remember, if you could subscribe on there and subscribe to the podcast, that really helps us out and helps other people get to see it too. And so definitely share with people as you think might be interested. So thank you guys for listening, and enjoy some college football, man. I'll talk to y'all later. Have a good week.